Hello, good to have you back for our weekly podcast, Deep Drive, powered by Kotak Mahindra Prime. Now, on this week's episode, we're going to be talking about a company that's had quite a rocky ride in India. They've really struggled to get market share, but the company has big plans, and that company is Nissan. I'm Hormazd Sorabjee.
And I'm Sergius Barretto. And indeed, Hormazd, like you said, I think they've had a rocky ride, not for want of trying. I mean, if you look at it, they have really tried to crack the Indian market. They've had hatchbacks, sedans, SUVs, locally built CBUs. You could say they've thrown a lot at the market. For whatever reason, not succeeded. But there is a plan now. Right. And we know it's a plan beyond just the Renault products.
Right. And I think, Sergius, you went to Japan where a big, long visit to Nissan. I think a lot of it was a global event.
Right.
So, what are the takeaways from there?
So Hormazd, absolutely. The event, I think the main event was essentially the new Juke unveil, the third generation Juke.
Quite a radical car. Huh?
Very radical car. Not coming here.
Yeah.
Right. It's a European specific model, but yeah, phenomenally radical. Just on a side note, I mean, the Juke was always funky. This one's funky and edgy.
Yeah.
And I promise you, every line you see there isn't lighting. It's an actual fold. It's an actual crease in the metal.
It must have been a real nightmare for the guys in the body shop.
Absolutely.
And the press shop to be able to get those sort of creases in.
No, really. So, we were talking to Alfonso Alvaiza, the head designer at Nissan, and he was explaining, saying that the car wasn't intended to be this way. One of their junior designers was working on the sort of structure and doing this polyhedral build, where they use lines and build it. And I believe, they were looking at it and thought, yeah, actually, maybe the car could look this way.
Yeah.
And they began to flesh it out. And we have what we have,
We'll see how it does in the market, not coming here.
Not coming here.
But I think let's talk about what's coming here. I think, Sergius, some things we know.
Yeah.
Some things we know that others don't know, which we'll talk about. And I think clearly, I think it's a new beginning in a way, because it's a beginning without Renault. Right. They've kind of, let's say, given up or sold their stake in the plant. Still there in engineering, but of course that capacity is gone. A lot of people thought that if Nissan's selling that, it means they're exiting. But I don't think anyone's going to exit India. Let's get that straight. India, I think, is a market that you cannot afford not to be in the long term. Exactly. So whoever's got their foot in here, even if they're not doing well, they're just going to stick it out and try and make it work.
Absolutely.
Because I think looking at the way the world is going, geopolitics, challenges in China, US with the tariffs. Okay, India's a market that, the next big market where there seems to be a lot of headroom. So clearly Nissan will have plans for India. But it's without Renault, as we said. So what the implications are with that?
Absolutely. So it's I would say with and without Renault. So you're right, they have sold the stake in the plant, but they have reserved capacity. And I believe half the production, 250,000 units, is reserved for Nissan. So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
So they have a plan of 250,000. I don't know what happens if they don't fulfill that.
Exactly.
So what you're saying is that that capacity is kept for them. And Renault can't touch it.
Exactly. So they've guaranteed that, sort of, that's part of the
lot
agreement.
Of volume. I don't know what they're going to fill it with, but anyway.
Exactly. So that's one thing. So there is Nissan, while they don't own the plant, they have the capacity to produce cars if they need, well over, like, as you just said, they require perhaps.
Yeah.
The second is the engineering center. They do have the engineering center, the JV here, right? That's still intact. And, I was talking to Max Messina. I think his name is Massimiliano, Max for short, who's the head of the AMIEO region for Nissan, the chairperson. And he said, look, I mean, if we wanted to exit India, we could have done it at the time when we sold our stake. We were down to one model, just a Magnite. Right, we sold the stake there. Our dealers were few. He said, that was a perfect time to exit. But we weren't planning on exiting at all. He said, it's about restructuring, right, getting stronger. And he said, this way, we've got capacity, we can make our things, we're asset light, and we can introduce more models.
Yeah. Well, there is an advantage of that, but, for some things, they don't have the full engineering like Renault has, for example. And, before that, on the capacity, I think what's interesting is 250,000, there's no way they're going to use that in India.
Absolutely.
So clearly, there seems to be an export plan as well.
Absolutely.
So some of the models could be export because 250,000 is 20,000 units a month in India. I don't think they'll achieve that. I don't know when.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's
Not
gonna
soon,
be, and not
for
with the
sure.
current models they have. That's for sure. But I think the challenge is going to be, let's say on the Duster platform, which is also the Tecton platform, and the seven-seater, which they're going to have. They are going to be depending on Renault for a lot of engineering. So I think it's going to put them on the back foot. For example, I think everything on that has to be engineered by Renault, including the badges or whatever. So that whole they have to kind of outsource,
Right.
the whole program to Renault to kind of develop for them. And I think one kind of let's say what's come out of that of Renault holding the cards is Renault's not giving them the hybrid initially.
Yes.
So now we would say that the hybrid they just have to buy it from Horse, which is an independent engine supplier.
Right.
Which is what I thought also. But then who's going to do the engineering and integration of that powertrain, for Nissan?
Yeah.
So clearly that Renault has to do. And I think Renault are not going to be doing that for a while. So I think when the Tecton is launched, it will be without a hybrid. And clearly they'll just have these current engines. So they are on the back foot over there.
They are, absolutely.
Clearly. But depending a lot on Renault for the two key platforms.
Right.
Which is this RGMP, I think,
Right.
and REGP. I don't know if I'm getting it right, but I'm confused by them. I just know them by CMFA.
Yeah, they are the new versions of those platforms, the
and
CMFA
CMFB,
and the CMFB. They're basically the new ENEs regutted.
Correct. That's right. And
So-
obviously kind of developed for CNG and things like that. And,
EV.
again, looking at Renault, I think Nissan and Renault, you had an aftermarket CNG option on the old BR10. Now, Renault has gone and put or announced a 1-liter turbo with a CNG kit. And that's really exactly what these models need. So clearly you can see Renault taking the lead in this. And I think that's going to be a bit of a disadvantage for Nissan because these are the two core platforms which are in a way controlled by Renault.
Exactly, Hormazd. And Nissan knows this, right? They know that beyond the sort of shared models, they need their own models. And at the Gravite launch, Thierry Sabah, who's the vice president for India, the Middle East, and the region, he said that, look, we will have our models shared with our partners. They're great models, but we will also have our own distinct models too, our own ones. And he didn't mention which they were, but he did allude to, of course, the Nissan Patrol.
I think Nissan Patrol is pretty obvious. I think from what I understand, they did say it. And honestly, Sergius, that's quite an iconic model for Nissan. I think it would do fairly well here.
Right.
It would be a great brand builder, not, let's say into high volumes.
Right.
It's a pity it's a V6. It's not a V8 anymore. But still, I mean, we saw it at the Tokyo show. It looked huge. We did a walk around on it. It flew. And clearly, I think that is one model that, people would really want. There'd be a lot of pull on that. Yeah. Unlike what they did with the X-Trail, which was a total mess.
Exactly.
A total joke. I think so badly handled, overpriced. And then can you imagine?
Under-equipped.
And under-equipped. Yeah. And then can you imagine they sold it, the whole lot, to Big Boys Toys.
Right.
Who undercut the original price.
Right.
Put a few features in there and some leather seats and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and then sold it off.
Real.
Nissan dealers were mad. I think that was really a dumb bit of, let's say, whatever marketing or strategy to do. Because really, those sort of things really damage the brand. And clearly, you had these X-Trails being sold at a bargain price. Because in the first place, everyone knew at that price what it came in as a CB was not going to sell.
Exactly. No, absolutely. And they actually know this now. They've learned their lesson, I would say, because like you said, it didn't sell at all. And the problem wasn't, the product, the X-Trail. I mean, if they had just specced it right, they tried to hit a price target at 40 lakh, 50 lakh. You can't price it that way. I think CBUs are sold on emotion. They're sold on great value, not on, hey, it's a, cheap product. That's where they messed up. And with the Patrol, they're not going to do that. I mean, everyone was very categorical and saying that, no, we are going to get, well-spec, top of the line, it's going to target the heart.
Absolutely. And I think they're serious. They need to do a CKD operation on this to really get the price point down to a...
Or they could maybe just do through the import, which are not touched really right now. They're 2,500 units.
But the duties are very high.
Duties
So I
are
think
high.
clearly that's going to be an issue. And then if there's an FTA, what do you do? You know, so I think there's just a safe bet is to localize it. Your duties then immediately come down. You know, you have SKD and CKD. I mean, you know, even if you do an SKD, the duty would come down. Of course, that requires investment. So Nissan has to invest. You know, given its current, let's say, you know, global kind of a situation, financial health, the way they are pairing, you know, let's say the company in various ways, we don't know whether they would have an appetite to invest in India that much more. So clearly they need to do that. I think their strategy of having some really good CKD models, which are really brand drivers, which Renault doesn't have. That's one thing they have, which Renault doesn't have. You know, iconic models like the Patrol. Renault doesn't have anything like that. You know, the GTR, okay, that's gone. But, you know, that was once a real iconic product as well. So really, Nissan has a lot in its portfolio, which they could bring here just as brand shapers. And then, you know, focus also on the kind of made in India cars. So I think X-Trail also, if they could, you know, get it under the CKD, because honestly, we drove the X-Trail and it actually is a superb car. You know, even though it's a CVT, it just felt fantastic. And you could see Nissan's actually engineering in that.
Yeah, but you know, Hormazd, to do, I think, a CKD, the volumes might be too small for a car like the Patrol, you know, so perhaps they'd stick to CBU only.
Possibly, yeah, they would. But they need to invest in the Patrol is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, exactly. It is an iconic car. People know that brand in India. But, you know, beyond the Patrol, while that's the brand shaper, I think there are two other aces up their sleeves, which they're probably looking into. And we know this, right, is that they've got to get their own products. One is they have a joint venture with Dongfeng, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And now Dongfeng has a really nice range of products, of which there is the car called the Dongfeng Z9. It's a pickup right now, but there's going to be an SUV version. And they've said that it's going to go across Nissan regions.
It's very logical that there would be an SUV version. I mean, we've seen that's a standard thing, the way you've got the Hilux and the Fortuner.
Correct.
On top of that, you have the Ford Ranger and the Everest or Endeavour.
Exactly.
So very logical. And actually, Sergius, you know, when you said Dongfeng, I think that's a lot of potential. Because what we are seeing, China spec cars, I think Indian consumers are aligning more towards China than to Europe, you know, and I think the Chinese which are showing the way of what really works in India. We've seen it across luxury cars, you know, whether it's, let's say, the E-Class, which is again origins in China, BMW, iX1, again Chinese, what JSW is doing. So clearly, I think even what Volkswagen is doing globally is that they're using China's low-cost engineering base, and actually good engineering.
Yes.
So I think these Dongfengs could be engineered by the joint venture, but badge Nissans.
Exactly. They are joint venture developed products. You know, they've had this JV with, I think, them since 2003. So it's a very old JV. They've been engineering cars together. This product, which is the Z9, the Dongfeng Z9, it also will go as a Nissan, and in Europe it will be the Nissan Navara, from what at least the European press are reporting. And then you've got
what's the engine spec?
Now here's the interesting part, Jonas. It's a ladder on frame vehicle.
Right? Really?
It's ladder on frame, so like the Fortuner, ladder on frame. But it's got a plug-in hybrid, a first for Nissan as well.
Right.
So you've got a plug-in hybrid, you know, with around 100 plus kilometers of range. So there's a sizable battery in there. It's a petrol 1.5 liter turbo, right? They've also got a diesel, pure diesel, not hybrid, you know, so just pure combustion. So that, you know, is something...
has a lot of potential, a lot of possibilities for the Indian market.
Immense possibilities.
And a potential Fortuner rival, perhaps, I don't know what they're going to price it at, but if they undercut the Fortuner,
right,
maybe around 40-ish.
Yes.
The Fortuner's gone way up.
Sure.
You know, I mean, competition for the JSW, the Jetour.
T2, yeah.
So this also could be there. So it's something which, you know, Nissan should be looking at.
They should be.
Again, a lot of possibilities there.
Yeah, if you just look at the pickup, they call it the Frontier Pro. The Nissan version is called the Frontier Pro or the Dongfeng Z9. So the Nissan Frontier Pro, which is going to go exported to all these markets as the Frontier Pro, it is a very upright, boxy, you know, muscular thing. And obviously the SUV would carry on with that same styling. And that works. We've seen that works. People love these sort of butch, macho-looking SUVs. Like you correctly said also, China knows how to engineer well and at a cost. they're spec'd well too. I mean, I was looking at the spec of this Frontier Pro, the car inside, nice touchscreen, really large, high definition, climate control, the works that you'd expect in a sort of luxury vehicle. It's got it all, So that is something that Nissan could bring to India. And like we just discussed earlier, they've got capacity at the plant.
Right.
250,000 units.
There would be export potential for that as well,
Right,
out of here,
right.
to the Middle East. In any case, I think that's one of their big markets. I think
Exactly.
I think Toyota is looking at the Middle East as a big market, for the FJ. So I think clearly, obviously, there's a lot of export potential. I mean, as you said, Indian market alone won't mop up that capacity.
It won't, yeah. But I was just wondering, so let's say they do decide to go ahead, we're speculating, obviously, but if they do decide to go ahead on this, how easy is it for them to bring that platform to be made here in India at the plant?
Well, I think, being body on frame, it would require a completely different line because these are all monocoque lines. Right. So I think not that easy. But, I think it really depends on how much they're willing to invest, And I think right now they've got a lot of other fires to put out in the world, a lot of restructuring to do. As they've axed a lot of models right now. So I think once that dust settles, maybe they will look at India. The problem is when companies are not doing great, and they won't give priority to market where they're not even, let's say, 1 or 2% of it, So why would they? They'd obviously give focus to their kind of, let's say, high volume markets where they have big market share. So obviously Nissan India will be down in that sense. Yeah, it's a tantalizing prospect actually, let's say a Fortuner rival with all the powertrains which you spoke of. I mean, a plug-in hybrid on a heavy body on frame. I mean, actually a perfect powertrain for that because you've got electric power to move all that weight. And the benefit of fuel efficiency on a hybrid is maximum on heavier cars and bigger cars. So that would be something very good. Of course, they also have their CAFE targets to meet. We don't know what they're going to be doing on electrification, but clearly they would follow Renault's lead over there. We don't know if they're going to be doing a subcompact SUV, which Renault is doing. One would assume they would also have access to that. So one can assume that. As I said, they've got access to that entire platform. But of course, Renault's controlling that. But I think, Sergius, beyond that, I think there are so many other models as well.
There are, Hormazd. So Dongfeng or the Frontier Pro, the Nissan Frontier Pro is, I would think, the main contender for the reasons we just discussed. There's also the Kicks. Now, this may sound odd, given that
we had the Kicks earlier. It didn't do too well.
It didn't do well at all, because unfortunately, that wasn't a European Kicks, right? It was a rebodied sort of Kicks. That was a completely different platform. Here they used the CMF, what was it called? The previous platform.
The M0.
Not the CMF. It was the M0, right? Yeah. The M0 platform. So they just, took that body style, put it on the existing M0 platform, tried to make it work. Interiors weren't so great, touchscreen, little low res and things like that. Didn't really click. The Kicks, though, in the rest of the international market has moved on to the second generation. Now, that model is sort of built on the CMF-B HS, the high spec, not named after you, the HS.
But a lot of things are named after me.
Right, true. So, but yeah, the CMF-B HS, which we know is essentially the sort of bones of this new RGMP with the new ENE.
Yeah.
So they could very easily get the new Kicks here.
Right.
It's launched.
Sergius, I think it would be expensive. European spec cars, that price to size ratio may not add up. But
right.
I mean, it's definitely worth evaluating because again, it looks pretty cool.
Yeah, it looks quite nice, very modern. Very different. Not like butch and sort of tough like, let's say, this Frontier Pro.
Yeah. But the only thing is, where would it sit alongside the Tecton? Because it's not that much bigger. And clearly it would be more expensive. So unless they do a very small volume of that, or if they have export plans for that as well, because really exports is what's going to be driving a lot of product portfolios for these sort of companies in the future, because they need the export volume to justify doing it in India, because locally they just won't have the scale.
Yeah, exactly. The only other benefit I see, at least, of them doing this here is it also shares a powertrain. So you've got the 1 liter, the turbo unit that is also in this Kicks.
Right.
So you could share that powertrain. Maybe it's one of the powertrain options that they have internationally.
Right.
So that could be an option, an outside option, like we were just discussing. I think we'd probably lead with the Frontier Pro, and then maybe
Right.
the Kicks.
Yeah. Yeah, but Sergius, products are one thing, but honestly, my worry is the company itself. It's quite weak in every way. I think, firstly, the retail network isn't very strong. The dealers, clearly, when you are not successful, they are demotivated. You have to remotivate them. Obviously, good products do that, but then it takes time. I'll be honest, you need much stronger leadership over here, much stronger commitment. Nissan has to show the color of money over here, because if they don't do that, they're not going to fly. They have to really buy back their market share over here. That's the only way it'll work. They've shown, an appetite with, pricing. They tend to undercut Renault.
On the Gravite as well.
The Gravite they did very marginally. And the fact that, they would obviously have to give something to Renault for engineering for them, the engineering services that Renault provides. So that also would have gone into their margin. And then on top of that, they're undercutting. So they're pretty much willing to take a knock on that. But that's not enough. You need to build a brand. You need a strong team. So that I think that is absolutely key.
Yeah, and on the dealers, almost they are 240, 250 odd dealers currently, but the target is 400 by the end of this financial year. So there is an expansion plan there. So yes, like we've seen with the pricing on the Gravite, like you just said, they're showing some appetite to do something there. They seem to be showing an appetite to invest on the network too. So that's I think also something that they're leveraging on.
I think the one thing that Nissan has over Renault is being Japanese. And I think, even very few people may know that it's shared with Renault, but just Nissan being a Japanese brand has a certain cachet, and I think it's all thanks to the huge reliability of the Hondas, even Maruti Suzuki, Toyota over here, which kind of has built a perception that Nissans are very reliable and, they're trouble-free. So I think that builds a lot of comfort, and that's one strength they really need to play to, is their kind of Japanese legacy. I wouldn't say DNA, because the cars, a lot of them don't have the Japanese DNA.
Not the current.
Yeah,
lot.
but at least their legacy of being a pretty old Japanese brand, a very successful Japanese brand, it's really, really quite old. And so I think that's what they really need to play on. But I still think, it's going to be quite an uphill climb, because just looking at the state of Nissan globally and Nissan in India, it's going to take fundamentally a lot of money, and we have to see if Nissan has the appetite to put their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, I mean, Indians love Japanese products, right? Whether, like you said, the cars, the examples that we've had. Even like electronics, Sony, I still remember those Aiwa TV or Akai TV, if I remember, you're leaning into the Japanese heritage. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think that's also another card that they should play.
Yeah, that's right. Well, obviously, but that's still not enough, because their market share is still low. So I think a lot of work to be done. They have that kind of, let's say, advantage. But really, it remains to see what, as I said earlier, what Nissan does. And that's it from us from Deep Drive. Do hope you enjoyed watching this ep, and do tune in every Saturday at 11 a.m. to catch all our future episodes. And so that you don't forget, click on the bell icon to be notified. And remember, you can even find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thanks for watching. See you again, same time next week.